Well, kia ora, good afternoon everyone. As we've talked about before, the world is currently facing the greatest disruption to fuel supply, I think, in a generation. New Zealand is in a good position with healthy stocks of fuel in the country and more on the way, and the market is operating as normal. But of course, we are actively planning for a scenario where obtaining future supply becomes more difficult. Hundreds of thousands of Kiwi jobs and incomes rely on fuel. Our entire economy relies on fuel. A shortage of fuel supply could affect thousands of livelihoods, so that is why we are continuing to ensure that we have sufficient supply, and that must be our first priority. At the same time, we are conscious that the increasing price at the pump is eating into household budgets. New Zealanders are very resilient people, but it's probably an understatement to say that the last few years have been incredibly tough for everyone. Kiwis have been knocked around by the pandemic, then high inflation and the recession, then the tariffs, and now the Middle East conflict. It's taken our government the better part of 2 years to take the economy out of recession and to get it growing again. The economic recovery was just starting to gain momentum when the conflict in the Middle East began. Higher fuel prices are a direct result of the conflict in the Middle East, which New Zealand has no part of or control of. But because of those higher prices, many Kiwis are making sacrifices and changes to their household budgets in order to get through this period. Some people are choosing to take public transport instead of driving their car. Others are having to put off other purchases in order to prioritise getting petrol in the car so that they can get their kids to school. Good government means looking after your people, and that means two things. One is recognising when government support is required to help people when times are tough. And two is ensuring that we protect New Zealand's economic future so that our kids and our grandkids have higher incomes and better job opportunities and don't have to pay for mountains and mountains of government debt. So we're very conscious of bending the debt curve down and making spending decisions that are affordable for taxpayers now and also into the long term. It is a hard reality that we cannot alleviate the pressure of rising fuel costs for everyone. And as we have learned from the COVID response, seeking to do so would do more damage to our economy, which has just started growing again. With this policy that Nicola will announce shortly, we believe we've struck the right balance of supporting those most in need at a very difficult time and ensuring we also don't drive up inflation and higher levels of debt. I'll now let Nicola talk through the support package.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Today the Government is announcing support for the Kiwi families most affected by the conflict in the Middle East. The Government is acutely aware that the conflict is affecting virtually all Kiwi people and businesses. Put simply, Operation Epic Fury and its resulting fallout is hurting all Kiwis. The longer traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, the greater that impact will be on the price of other goods. Diesel is a key to most producers of goods and services in our economy. However, the Government is also conscious that an untargeted response to the conflict could have long-lasting and painful consequences for the New Zealand economy. We saw this in the aftermath of COVID. Excessive spending more than doubled debt and sent inflation soaring and mortgage rates skyrocketing. Kiwis are still grappling with the effects of that today. Those most affected by the global shockwaves hitting the New Zealand economy are lower to middle income families who cannot easily avoid higher fuel costs. These are people who provide critical services to other Kiwis and help drive our economy. Some have no choice but to drive to work because they are doing so at times or in places where public transport is unavailable. Others have no choice but to drive their kids to school. Therefore, I am announcing that from next month, 143,000 low to middle income working families with children will get an extra $50 a week in their bank accounts. The money will be delivered through a boost to the in-work tax credit. That goes to low to middle income working families with children. The boost will also expand eligibility for this payment to about 14,000 additional working families who will receive the tax credit at an abated rate, that is, at less than $50. The increase will be temporary, lasting for 1 year, or until the price of 91 octane petrol drops below $3 a litre for 4 consecutive weeks, whichever comes first. This initiative will deliver support to working families who are under significant financial pressure without making inflation worse or further driving up government debt. The policy is carefully targeted to families in the squeezed middle. Parents who are working hard for a living are not eligible for main benefits and yet have modest household incomes with which to support their children. We know these families will be hit particularly hard by the global fuel price shock. An amendment to the taxation bill currently before Parliament will be introduced tomorrow so that the changes can be enacted from the 1st of April. Most eligible households will not need to do anything to receive the increase. It will simply be paid directly into their bank accounts. For households that are paid weekly, payments will start on the 7th of April. For households that are paid fortnightly, payments will start on the 14th of April. Families who think they may be eligible but are not currently receiving the in-work tax credit should check their eligibility and apply to Inland Revenue online. The policy will cost up to $373 million. Importantly, this cost will be met from within the Budget 2026 operating allowance, which we have previously committed will not exceed $2.4 billion. That means the government will not be borrowing any more than was previously planned to deliver this temporary and targeted support. Funding the policy this way will not add to forecast debt and will not add to inflationary pressure. It is consistent with the government's fiscal strategy, which seeks to balance the books and bend the debt curve down. We cannot control global oil markets or international conflicts, but we can soften the impact on working families who cannot easily avoid higher fuel costs by delivering support in a responsible and well-targeted way. The government knows there are many other families who would also welcome support to deal with rising prices. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, our ability to provide additional support is limited by the big increase in debt that occurred in the aftermath of COVID. We are close as a country to the upper level of debt that Treasury considers prudent. However, the government is closely monitoring developments and we will continue to respond with care and judgment. We are giving consideration to other measures that may be needed in response to the fuel crisis. Any other measures will be consistent with our goals of keeping pressure off inflation and debt under control. In the meantime, I want to assure people of 4 key things. 1, the government is working very closely with the fuel industry to prepare for the possibility of disruptions to fuel supply and to minimise the potential impact on the businesses that employ people, create jobs and move goods around our economy. 2, there has been no disruption to the delivery of frontline public services and the government remains committed to ensuring these continue. 3, the government will not take reckless decisions that harm the economy. We will protect New Zealand's future. And finally, the steps we are announcing today will provide meaningful assistance to some of those who need it most. These are, if it's not you getting the support today, just know it might be your friend, it might be your family member, it might be the person serving you at the cafe today. Working families who cannot easily avoid higher fuel costs. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thomas.
What was behind your decision to fund this out of your budget operating allowance, and what is coming out of those so that you can put this in?
Simply the commitment that I've made to New Zealanders that we will respond to this crisis in a way that doesn't put more pressure on inflation, because we know that that will worsen price increases across the economy for everyone and potentially increase the duration of these price increases. We saw that after COVID. Inflation stayed out of control for 33 months in a row. It reached intergenerational highs. Second, because as I've said, we are living in a more fragile world. International borrowing costs are rising. They are not decreasing, and New Zealand is already coming very close to its debt limits. We must be responsible. By funding this from within our budget operating allowance, we can keep to a fiscal strategy that is responsible in uncertain times. It is always the case, as has been the case in my previous 2 budgets, that in order to prioritise the things that really matter, frontline public services in our hospitals, our schools, our police, support to these working families, that we will have to make trade-offs elsewhere. We will prioritise carefully. We have already delivered $43 billion worth of savings across 2 budgets. That effort will continue so that we can support the Kiwis who need it most.
Sorry, Jamie.
Speaking of those trade-offs, what won't you be funding in the budget or on the operating allowance because you're having to put this potentially $30 million aside from this?
Well, I don't deliver the budget until the end of May, and I'm in the midst of putting that budget together. As you'd expect, I'm working with every minister to ensure that we are able to keep delivering effective public services, that we are prioritising the things that New Zealanders would expect us to prioritise, operations in our hospitals, frontline police on the beat, ensuring that our schools have the resources they need to teach our kids well. Those will remain priorities, but as any prudent government should do in a time like this, we will also be making sure that there is not wasteful or inefficient spending happening in other areas of government.
Okay, guys. Sorry, guys. We'll just do it. So, in order. Joe.
Nicola, you've already indicated that there might be other stuff that needs to come down the line depending on how bad this gets. Are you thinking that you're going to be able to do all of that through the operating allowance and reprioritisation, or are you accepting already that you're probably going to have to borrow money down the track in order to pay for parts of this?
No. What I've said to you really clearly today is that we do need to be bound by our fiscal strategy, which is to say we saw what happened after COVID. When the government let all of the normal rules go, we saw inflation go far higher than it needed to, debt more than double as a proportion of the economy, and it has taken New Zealand many years to climb its way out of that mess. I am determined not to repeat those mistakes and to take a fiscally prudent approach. It is always the case that a responsible government that is prepared to prioritise can prioritise the things that are most important, and we will.
So you'll simply cut other things to pay for whatever is required?
We will prioritise the things that New Zealanders would expect us to prioritise.
Okay, I've got to go to Jenna, and then I'll come to Henry, and then Benedict.
Looking at the things that families are paying for right now, Prime Minister, you mentioned getting the kids to school.
Yep.
Why then have you chosen to exclude beneficiaries who do have children in school from this announcement?
Yep. Look, I mean, as I said before, we cannot alleviate the pressure on everybody as a function of our fiscal constraints that we're dealing with, and that we want to be responsible economic managers about that. We've been very clear about our frame, which is it has to be temporary targeted, and it's for working people. And these are the people that are doing it the toughest. These are the genuinely squeezed middle, lower middle income working New Zealanders, 143,000 families. Think about the number of kids and individuals involved with that. On the beneficiary side, there's no adjustment to this tax bracket. There's this tax credit, for example, for inflation adjustment. Obviously, in beneficiaries, we do.
So I'd just add to that, beneficiaries automatically have their benefits increased on the 1st of April this year. Working families don't get that.
Yeah.
And I'd also note, working families face the obligation to get to and from work each day. Beneficiaries do not face that obligation.
On that obligation, has the government given any thought to removing sanctions for beneficiaries who can't make it to job interviews because of the fuel prices, or any sanctions on parents that can't get their kids to school?
No. Our sanctions regime is working very well. Actually, you would have seen even in the last 12 months the behaviour and the beneficiaries are fully compliant with their obligations that they have. In fact, I think it stepped up to 99.5% just in the last quarter. So that is working well to say, look, you still have an obligation and a job, obviously, to look for a job. You're not being penalised for a job, as we've talked about with respect to sanctions. But no, that's not something we consider. Henry. Now, guys, we'll just go in order. Henry and then Benedict.
When people lost their jobs at the GFC, job keys, they didn't get work pay credit for being for 8 weeks. people could lose their job in the fuel prices for no fault of their own. Now lose both their jobs and those severe boost tax credit. Did you consider at all whether you would give a temporary boost in their boost tax credit to people who have just lost their jobs, not currently unemployed people who have lost their jobs as a result of the fuel prices?
Well, we're dealing with today's crisis, not yesterday's crisis, and we're taking a targeted response that responds to what we are seeing. As I've shared with you previously, the Treasury is continuing to forecast growth in the New Zealand economy, and so the measures that you're referring to are not measures that I've been advised we should be considering at this time.
Do you believe that? I mean, obviously, the Treasury has very specific forecast.
Well, look, I've been really straight with New Zealanders. There are a range of scenarios and forecasts about what will happen. We don't know what decisions the US administration, Israel, Iran, the other countries in the Middle East will make over the coming days, weeks and months. We do not know how long it will be until global supply chains normalise. And so we are looking ahead to forecast a range of scenarios. But it is also a fact that Treasury have advised me that across a broad range of scenarios, they do continue to expect that the New Zealand economy will keep growing. I've been candid. There is no question that this is a bad time for the New Zealand economy because of the price increases that New Zealanders are facing and because of the fuel shock that is occurring. We are very conscious of that. What we're announcing today are measures that target those most vulnerable working families who require additional support at this time.
And I think what we cannot deal with, Luke, is the fact that we don't know what the scenarios will be. No one does, and any commentator that pretends they do, I just say that's not the case. What we have to do is take a responsibility very seriously in a very measured, calm, good management model to actually think about the scenarios that could emerge. And there's a whole bunch of economic implications, there's a whole bunch of fuel supply implications, and we've got to work our way through those piece by piece. But what we've got to do is make sure that we're managing the economy responsibly, and that any support that we're offering is targeted and timely and temporary, as we've talked about. That is the frame by which it's important we've got lenses and criteria and principles that as we deal with a huge amount of uncertainty of what could or may not happen, we've got to be able to have that frame in place, because that is the lesson that I think every New Zealander understands deeply. The pain and suffering we have gone through is because of the lessons and the mistakes that were made through COVID about that, not having those frames in place. And we are determined as a government to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support New Zealanders, knowing that we may not, knowing that we cannot support everybody, but equally we're trying to keep an eye to the future to make sure that we don't stuff the place up for our kids and our grandkids and deal with long-run consequences of that, which is what we've been dealing with, and you saw with the Fitch report over the weekend as well. So it's a constant balance between those two things, where we're pragmatic, practical, calm, doing the planning, doing the thinking in place, but we've got to have those riverbanks and those criteria in place because, having lost formation so badly in COVID and having dealt with those consequences for so long, that's not something that we can prepare. We can do again.
What difference are you hoping that this $50 extra week will make for Kiwi families?
Well, the first thing I hope is that there are around 150,000 families today who feel some relief. The government has heard you. We are responding. We know you're under a lot of pressure right now, and there will be more money coming into your bank account. And what I hope it means for those families is that they can continue to feed their children well, that they can continue to get to and from work each day and take their kids to school each day without facing huge levels of anxiety. And I know that the impact will vary from family to family, and I know for some families they will say this isn't enough. But what I would say to them is we are doing what we can do responsibly, protecting you now, but also protecting the economic future that you and your kids are depending on us for.
But what about all those workers out there who don't have families? They're still getting smashed by the high fuel prices, right?
Yeah, look, I fully acknowledge that. My first commitment to them is they would not thank me if I did so much spending that inflation went higher. Because that would affect them every time they pay for anything. That would lead to price increases more broadly across the economy. My second commitment to them is that I take their job and income extremely seriously, which is why we are taking such a considered response to mitigating the impact of the fuel crisis. But finally, I just ask them to reflect. In the aftermath of COVID, we did see the government doing an awful lot of untargeted spending, and the result was a cost of living crisis with inflation that remained high for many years. a huge debt burden for the country, an economy that was very badly damaged. We can't repeat that mistake.
Okay, sorry, we'll go to Jenna and then Janae, and we'll come to you. Sorry.
One of the things that Krista can said this morning that the DPMC and MB officials briefed him on this morning was that the expectation is that fuel prices will remain high for 100 days. Is that the same advice that you've been given? Can you communicate that? How it's been given to you to cover?
I just first want to acknowledge that, yes, we have asked our officials to brief the opposition parties about the response to the Iran conflict, which is consistent with our view that this is an event of national significance, and we've put aside some partisanship in order to ensure that those briefings can occur. In answer to the second question, as I've said, yes, there are a range of scenarios, but we are working on a time horizon in which we are prepared for this shock to continue for some time.
And that's the most likely scenario at the moment.
There are still a range of scenarios.
Just regarding the...
Sorry, Thomas, do you mind if I just follow the logic, Janae?
Will the operating allowance at budget remain at $2.4 million?
Yes, I've always said that's a ceiling, not a floor.
Okay, so I guess if the conflict was prolonged and you decided after the budget that more support was needed for households and businesses, there was a chance that you might need to take out more debt than was factored into the forecasts and projections at the budget. Is that right?
Well, we would need to do that in a way that was consistent with our fiscal strategy, in which we've committed to a goal of getting the books back in balance, bending the debt curve down and reducing government spending as a share of the economy. Of course, between budgets, there are always between budget contingencies of funds that we put aside. Occasionally we pre-commit funding against future operating allowances, so there would be a range of choices and options. But I just want to remind you, Fitch, the ratings agency, at the weekend sent New Zealand a pretty stark warning. We're on watch. Why does that matter? Because when rating agencies downgrade a country's debt rating, it means that we potentially have to pay more for debt, particularly in a less stable world. So we are mindful of that. We are mindful of the need to stick to our fiscal strategy, and the greatest risk to the fiscal strategy right now is the election of a Labor-led government.
So just on that, is there a chance then that, do you need to make that operating allowance smaller than $2.4 billion to give yourself a bit of space to potentially, provide more support if issues arise? I know you said it's a ceiling.
Yeah, well, it is a ceiling, and as you saw in my last budget and the budget before, I delivered a lower operating allowance than we had forecast. It is the case as we're putting together this budget, we are thinking very carefully about what contingencies may be required across government agencies to allow for a range of circumstances that could occur.
Okay, here and then go, Thomas.
The cost of this policy is roughly the same as the cost of a 3-month cut to fuel excise of 25 cents. That would affect a whole lot more New Zealanders. Was that considered as a possibility?
Can I talk to that? I mean, because I think that's the lesson we're trying to articulate really strongly, which is, I can understand the appeal and we see those ideas floated, but that is incredibly untargeted. Wealthy people get the benefit of that, and actually lower middle income working New Zealanders who desperately need more assistance and more help. That is a really untargeted example. So I understand the justification for why people keep floating that idea at us, but we're really clear about we have to learn the lessons of what has really had huge amounts of consequence for New Zealand economically from the COVID experience. And that was a classic case where untargeted, open slather, money bazooka fired around, caused huge damage, great short-term gain, massive long-term pain. And so, respectfully, I hear that idea a lot, as a number of others as well, but it's about we are coming through these lenses, as I said, of trying to find responsible economic management so we don't run up our debt and our inflation and our interest rates, which causes the pain and suffering, but equally being temporary, targeted and timely. Okay, Thomas.
Regarding the adjustments to benefits, I think the inflation adjustment comes from Q3 of the last year. So the inflation adjustment is going to be quite a bit lower than the inflation that those people receiving those benefits are experiencing this year. And I think that the stats household inflation data shows that beneficiary inflation costs are above 5%. Has any thought been given, has any advice been asked for on adjustments to be made to bring that inflation?
No. Our focus is on working Kiwis.
Yeah.
We are very focused on them. The last government made a decision to structurally increase beneficiary rates during the COVID crisis, and they remain structurally higher. We will be increasing main benefit rates on the 1st of April, so a couple with children receiving job seeker support will receive an increase of more than $20 a week. We make no apologies. We are focused on working New Zealanders.
And superannuitants obviously benefit from the 1st of April changes as well, which is good.
It's fair to say that I put this proposal to them and asked for advice on it. As I outline in the fact sheet, I did look at the concept of the independent earner tax credit as well. That had a number of problems with it that officials advised me on, in particular that at the moment 3/4 of people who receive that payment don't get it until a year later, so it wouldn't meet the timely test which I've set. And in order to deliver it to them in a more timely manner, I was advised it would take up to 3 months to update payroll systems, which again wouldn't meet the payroll test. It also wouldn't have met the targeted test as well, because at a cost of more than $500 million, we would have only been able to deliver a $10 a week increase. So I rejected that option early on, and this proposal that I brought to you is the proposal I brought to Cabinet. Yes, they did. They very much agree with us that it is prudent to provide timely, temporary and targeted support. They also agree that choosing an existing mechanism that we know already works makes this administratively less complex, more efficient. They also agree that what we have is what they call in Treasury parlance a distribution challenge, which is that when you get a price shock of this sort, it does impact lower income households more than it does higher income households, because lower income households have less discretionary spending, fewer choices about how they spend.
All right, can we go to Tom?
Was there any consideration given to increasing the amount the government subsidises for public transport, and they've agreed to us for it to be 3, which would be too much? Was there any consideration given to increasing the amount of the subsidies given that?
Look, we're very aware that public transport is going to play a very important role as New Zealanders respond to this price shock, and we're determined to keep public transport services running really well. That's why yesterday the Minister of Transport met with the public transport authorities to make sure they have enough capacity so that people can keep making that choice. He also was assured they're not intending to increase fares in any way. The government provides generous subsidies in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars a year for public transport, and our commitment is that we will make sure public transport remains an option for New Zealanders during this price shock.
Just to be clear, that's a no. There was no.
I didn't say that.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
your word, not mine.
Joe?
Sorry, have you received any advice or given any consideration at this point to regional New Zealand in terms of people who don't have the public transport element, may not meet the criteria for tax credit, obviously have super high costs in this area as a result of the thing?
Well, first I want to acknowledge that some rural New Zealanders will benefit from the proposal we're announcing today. Rural New Zealanders on low to middle income families will be eligible for this payment today. I think what you're referring to is something that we are acutely conscious of, which is that rural communities typically in doing their work, whether that's running a harvesting machine or getting to and from work, do tend to use a lot of diesel. What we have been told to expect is that will mean that for some of those rural contracting businesses, they will likely start charging their customers more for those services, imposing fuel surcharges and the like. What I have been mindful of is that while in time farmers may have to meet those greater costs, right now for some contractors and others they might face an immediate cash pressure. And that is one of the reasons why I have rung each of the chief executives of the major commercial banks in New Zealand to seek assurance that at a time like this they will stand alongside their customers to ensure they can be helped through this period. They have given me that assurance, and I think it's really important that if rural contracting businesses or others are feeling immediate challenges, that they do know they can talk to their bank and that their bank will work to assist them where possible.
Okay, sorry, so go ahead.
Sorry, there is another group here as well, though, Nicola, who may not meet the criteria in terms of income around the tax and perhaps have a bit of extra savings or cash flow, but perhaps work in, rural agriculture stores, don't have public transport, need to drive their kids to school, run diesel vehicles as a result of living rurally. That's a particular group.
It's also the case in urban New Zealand that there may be shift workers for whom public transport isn't available. I fully acknowledge that there are people who will be feeling the pain at the pump that this package won't provide direct support to. And I acknowledge that fully. But our commitment to those people is first we have to do no harm. And if we go on a major spend out trying to assist every New Zealander impacted by this price shock, we will drive up inflation, we will drive up debt, we will damage the economy. It is a difficult balance to strike. And I just again want to say, I get it. It's tough on just about every Kiwi in business right now. It really is.
Sorry.
Minister Willis.
Has any consideration been given at all to really targeted business support? I appreciate what you're saying about access to debt from banks, but there's some sectors that are particularly exposed to high fuel costs. Have you looked at that?
No.
Mr. Willis, in your opening remarks, you made a mention that Operation Epic Fury was hurting New Zealanders. Is that an acknowledgement that US foreign policy is hurting New Zealanders?
I'm going to leave the Prime Minister to comment on US foreign
I mean, what
policy.
we're saying is, every day we're waking up with different news and different tweets and different comments from lots of different people. And as I've said, consistently through this whole conflict, we are not a central player in this. We're not a central player in the region. We can't control, sadly, these events. We wish that to get resolved. We wish this, conflict to get, and all the leaders I've been talking to, we're all wishing it to get resolved quickly. We hope that there's a resolution. But we can't be. Markets are getting bounced around by comments that are changing every single day.
Does that include comments by the US President?
Well, include all leaders in the region that are in that space, and that is. It's interesting to a point, but actually what's interesting to Nicola and I is we have to deal with the consequences of the current crisis. And so the answer very clearly for us is, look, we want that resolved. Yes, there's lots of people getting bounced around by lots of different comments that are changing every single day. We have to stay very, very focused on New Zealanders and actually Kiwis, and actually what they need us to be doing is our job to make sure we're protecting their future by not making the mistakes of COVID, which are very evident and very obvious and are very clear for us to avoid, but equally making sure that we can support Kiwis where we can, when we can, with targeted temporary support. So, it's our focus is really on the consequences of that conflict. We wish it to be resolved, but let's be really honest. Sitting here in New Zealand, a long way away from that region, our ability to control that conflict is not there at all. Our ability to control the consequences of it is what we have to deal with. Yes. Sorry? No, look, we stand by our position. Yeah, look, again, we stand by the statements that we've made in the Parliament and the statements that the Minister of Foreign Affairs and myself have made subsequently. The reality is this is an independent action by the US and Israel on Iran. We are not party to it. We have not received any information about it. We've not had subsequent debriefings about it. What I've done is talk to the Emir of Qatar. I've spoken to the leader in the UAE. I've spoken to players across the region who have arguably more influence about how they're assessing the trajectory of this conflict. I continue to have those conversations. That continues to change. But ultimately, that's for the Americans and for the Israelis to respond to, as I said, from day one. What we have to deal with, as interesting as it may well be, we wish this conflict would go away. We wish there was less volatility and uncertainty in the world. We want New Zealanders who've gone through COVID, through a economy in recession with high inflation, who've dealt with tariffs last year and now dealing with the fuel crisis this year. We want that all to go away. We want to get on with plotting the course of where this great country can go. But for right here, right now, our job is to stay really, really focused on what New Zealanders need us to do, which is make sure we are economically responsible, make sure we offer them support whenever we can. Yes.
No, I wasn't tempted by the latter. In terms of the former, look, what we looked at was a range of scenarios about what will be happening to the prices people are paying to fill up a tank of gas in a family. We know that for many families it's already gone up $40. Many families have to fill a tank up each week. We're also mindful that there could be other price increases that impact families, and while we considered a range of numbers, the judgment we made was that $50 seemed the right and prudent level. But I do want to acknowledge that it won't cover all of the increased costs that every family faces. That is true, so those who say that will be correct. In other instances, it may be that people are able to take public transport and that they're able to mitigate their costs in other ways. I acknowledge people have a range of circumstances. This is a simple, clear policy that is easy for people to understand and that we can get into effect straight away. We are literally changing the law tomorrow and the money will turn up in people's bank accounts on the 7th of April. So this, we think, is a simple mechanism that will work.
Okay, team. Sorry, we have to go to Parliament, so we'll catch up with you a bit later on. Thank you so much.